I'm starting out using straight lines and angles, working on a 16 by 20 canvas. I have the master copy up on my monitor. It's a Dell monitor, which can turn horizontally and vertically. So I have it in the vertical position, and it's plugged into my MacBook, which is down here, which you can kind of see the corner of it. So I have them synced, so they're sharing a screen. The advantage of this is it allows me to adjust the size and turn it horizontally or vertically. This is a process that I like to use when I'm working from photos, but I could work from the screen on the MacBook as well. The color is pretty similar on the two of them. Starting with straight lines and angles, trying to feel the gesture of the head. It's a little hard to see what's in the background because I tried to make this image fairly dark, but I can basically see what's going on with the shoulders. A little harder than I might like. So I have my master copy that I'm working from set about a foot or two behind my canvas. This allows me to back up and squint and still work from general to specific, which is the way I like to work. Some people put them side by side. That's another method, but this way I'm using this process of squinting that we would normally do in our painting as I'm working on this. So I tried to grasp the gesture of the head. My thought process is, what can I reduce this down to so it's similar to some kind of rectangular shape? That's how I like to start, or that's how I start my thinking. So from my simple straight lines and angles, I'm going to put in a few lines to indicate the landmarks. So his head is at quite a tilt. So this is what I'm thinking. In my mind's eye, I'm comparing the tilt of his eyes to either a horizontal in this case, or it would be a vertical, but it's a horizontal. Putting the bottom of the nose or the base boundary of the nose and placing the mouth. I'm noticing that the mouth is considerably over to my right relative to the nose. So I'm paying attention to that as I'm placing my landmarks. So I'm thinking about the tilts of the line. So this particular line is at a tilt, like tilting relative to a horizontal. So I'm pretty satisfied with that tilt. But I try to establish very simplified tilts to my initial lines, and then from that I can start to modify them and carve into them and adjust them. So I'm doing that now, kind of adjusting these tilts. So every line I'm putting in, every straight line I'm putting in is at a tilt relative to, again, relative to either a horizontal or a vertical, a plumb line. So I don't necessarily have to draw them in, but meaning I don't necessarily have to draw in a plumb line, but in my mind's eye I'm using that. Now, this one right here, I initially had this going in the wrong direction, so I simply am going to make the shift. So I'm going to step back, take a look at what I have. Make corrections and start to carve out. Keeping things angular really enables you to see the simplest relationships between things. I want to end up with simple masses of light and shadow, but in my mind I'm building an armature that I'm going to lay everything on. So the end goal is to get simple shapes of light and shadows. I find if I work this way by establishing, for a portrait at any rate, by establishing these simple directional lines, it makes the work much easier than if I only worked with a big mass of light or shadow. So I'm conscious of the center line, okay? The center line of his head is at a tilt. So the top of his head is tilted to my left. So this would be upright, and this would be at a tilt. So I want to be really conscious of the tilt of his head, the turn of his head. His head is turned in this direction, and the tip, how high or how low is his chin. So in this case, this is the main thing I want to be very mindful of, the center line. So I could draw it right in, and that's fine if you want to do that. In this case, I can see it. So I tend to work that way. Meaning I try to visualize where it is, but it's perfectly fine to draw it in also. Okay, so now I've got my landmarks set up. I'm standing back to look at it. Going to make corrections. But I try to do as much as I can at this stage. So I see there's a general tilt of this line, the bottom of his chin, dropping down to my left, and yet there's another line on this side of his chin that seems to be going in the opposite direction. So I'm getting those. I try to also look across. So what I mean by this is, okay, I see here's his cheekbone, zygomatic. The bottom of his cheekbone, I'm noticing where it is relative to the nose, relative to the mouth. And when I visually move across the head, it's helping me to see where I'm going to place this shadow here, which is coming in below the cheekbone. So I'm trying to relate everything to, okay, we're relating things to a plumb line, to a vertical, right? So every line is tilting relative to an imaginary vertical. You can use the side of the canvas for that, the side of a model stand, but I'm relating to that. I'm relating to a horizontal. Okay, so perhaps the forehead is going to be relating to the horizontal, the chin, and I'm also then relating across. So when I'm looking from the cheekbone to the bottom of this shadow over here, I'm noticing that there's a relationship across, that it enables me to go point to point. So I'm going to use that strategy too. I haven't put his eyes in yet, but let me get them just placed a little bit. So I've got a basic idea of how I'm going to start, and I've kind of checked those things. I feel that it's too large. I tend to make things large, so I'm always on the lookout for how I've enlarged things. But I'm going to go ahead with it anyway and make adjustments as I go along. So I sense that his forehead is a little bit big. One of the concepts that I mentioned before was this idea of a series of adjustments. So I find that really helpful to think about a series of corrections or a series of adjustments. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and mask in the shadow shapes. The idea of a series of, the painting is a series of corrections is really helpful, because that way I'm like, it allows me to not feel that I have to get it absolutely perfect at every stage, and that I can move things around, and I want to have that freedom to move things around. I can't exactly see where the end of his head is, but I'm not going to worry about that too much right yet. I can see the hair, which is good. It's helping me get the shape of the head. Okay, I'm massing in. I'm massing in the shadows. I will wipe out the lights too. You can go back and forth between massing in the shadows and wiping out the lights. I tend to do one at a time. So right now, my concern, I'm going to end up with two large, big graphic values for the beginning part. Now, his jacket here, or coat, whatever it is in light, but it's a really dark tone. So I'm just going to go ahead and scumble in a little bit of the burnt umber that I'm using. The term scumble simply means applying the paint so that it's not totally opaque. My brush isn't fully loaded, so that means I don't keep putting a whole ton of paint on there. I'm just using what's on the brush and kind of pushing and letting it feel a little bit airy. I want that for this. I don't want it to be heavy, dense paint. By the way, I'm using Michael Harding burnt umber for this exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little background in here too. And I'm making it just a little darker so it's going to separate from the jacket. So by making it a little darker, essentially I'm going into a second value in the darks. I'm working on a canvas that I repurposed, toned back over. I don't know what I put over this one. I can see there's a figure underneath it, but it's working, so that's fine. So I'm just going to put a few darker lines here so I don't lose the hair. I want to simplify things, but I don't want to lose my boundaries between things in the process. I'm mentioning that because if I just let all the hair completely merge into the background, which it does when I squint, it might get just a little bit confusing. So I still want to kind of have a demarcation about where it is, where the hair ends and where the background begins. So I'm not completely losing that. I'm only putting in, right now I'm trying to only put in the bigger shadow shapes and not dark lights. So the dark lights, such as these darker values inside the cheek, are part of the light mass. So a common mistake is to make them so dark that they appear to be part of the shadow mass, and we don't want to do that because that's going to make it so the painting doesn't read properly. Unfortunately for me, I am completely out of Viva paper towels. One thing I did not stock up on before our quarantine, so I'm having to use some other brand, which I'm not really thrilled about, but you got to do what you got to do, folks. We got to make this work. All right, so now I'm wiping with the paper towels that I don't like, and I'm going to have to move some things around. I think the reason I like the Viva, I know some people use the shop towels from Home Depot or wherever, but they really wipe out beautifully. These don't have much grip. I feel like a commercial, but it's true. So I wiped right through the ball of the nose. I'm looking at over here there's been a little problem. So I'm looking at the tear duct down to the wing of the nostril. Those are really good measurements, really good relationships to help you see how things are set. So I was looking at that and noticing that wasn't quite right. Moving things around. Okay, so I want to see how the outside of the wing of the nostril here relates to the tear duct here. I want to check that relationship. Looking at the whole eye socket area. Looking at this relationship here. Trying to really feel these bigger structures. Gonna put things in and take them out. Okay, relating across. relating down. I'm not quite happy with the mouth where it's located. So I'm going to try to move that up a little. Let's see if that helps. And I'm looking from, okay, so we've got this shadow here underneath the cheekbone. And at the top of the shadow here, this is below the nose. And then I'm relating it across to the cheekbone. Not quite what I want to see. So I'm going to take a little time and get these things. I'm still adjusting things. So I'm not putting in too many smaller structures, just a few little things if they're going to help me with my drawing. But again, I want to try to work from the big shapes as much as I can. But if you need a few little dark light indicators, just like if you'd be doing a drawing, then put them in if they're going to help you. But we're still trying to work from the biggest information. So I just want you to understand that difference. I try to be mindful of how much paint and how much turf is on my brush, and also my energy. If my energy feels a little nervous, and it does feel like that today. We're in the middle of this pandemic. There was just a death in my family I shared with you guys, so I'm feeling a little bit, I don't even know what it is, but I'm aware of that in my handling of my paint. So, you know, you don't have to not be emotional, you can absolutely use it. So I say that because I can feel it in my body, how it comes out of my brush. You know, if I'm tired or if I'm anxious. But anyway, so if I feel, I'm sharing that because if I feel a little bit of nervous energy, I'll just kind of move around my painting and use that to my advantage. Okay, so it's looking a little bit better. I'm going to take a minute and just put a little bit of tone back here. And I'm using a number 4 brush, one of the silver brushes. This one is the long filbert, the 1034. And any kind of filbert would work for this. And the tone is the, you know, the golden gray number 6 tone is the what's in the background. Okay, so continuing, it's getting better. It was a little off in the beginning, but I'm starting to feel a little better about it. I can also wipe out with a smaller brush. So I have a number 2 here. Oh, this is a number 3, but I have rounds and some additional filberts. So this is a small filbert round, but I'm staying with, I'm staying with bristles, okay? And these are the filberts. This is a round. So this is a number 1 and a number 3. I can also wipe out like that. but I'm just very conscious right now about how much paint, how much turp I'm going to deposit on the surface. So I'm holding my paper towel in the opposite hand, so after I dip my brush in the turp, I can go like this to kind of dry it off a little bit. The other thing about wiping out like this, it can really work well, and it's a good method to learn. It does, make a little bit of hard edges on your painting, which is not my goal. It's just kind of the result of wiping out like this when you're doing an open grisaille. That's why I kind of keep wiping it off in between brush strokes. But you want to learn how to use it too, and mostly I'm doing this because these crappy paper towels that I have. My screen will periodically go off. You can adjust that in the screensaver. So now I'm just wiping out a little bit of the eyelid. I'm trying to think of the bigger plane as I'm wiping this out and hoping it's going to wipe out pretty easily. So I want to see the connection between this eyelid area and the temporal plane coming down here and how it goes right into the cheekbone. I want to make sure these bigger relationships are correct. That's my main concern right now. I think it's everybody's tendency, all of us, to try to build from the smaller things. But if you can get your larger relationships correct, you're going to have a much easier time. As you all know, with open grisaille, it leaves a little residue on the surface, and that can be a good thing. So that's just what it's a nice thing that you have available to manipulate. I see there's a little shadow up here that I wasn't paying attention to before. I'm going to add that in. Going to try a smaller brush now and see how I do with using it to wipe out. Again, be careful not to have too much turp on a brush if you're using it to wipe out. I dipped the brush in turp and then I dried it off on a paper towel. So I see there's a little blocky shape right here, and I was just in my mind's eye going across to see where it was in relation to the eyebrow here. I feel like the eyes are a little too far apart. And it's strangely, this eye is so far above this. I'm looking at this relationship and trying to figure out the larger relationship. Okay, I'm noticing the tilt underneath this eye is relative to a horizontal. It's dropping down this way ever so slightly, communicating the tilt of his head, perhaps a little bit larger tilt than what I have. And this eye doesn't look like it's looking at me. So I'm still working on lining up these relationships. So I'm wiping out that eyelid, and I want to get the plane above his eyebrow over here. I'm having better luck wiping out with this small round brush. Again, I'm keeping a paper towel in my opposite hand so I can I can control the amount of terp on the brush. So I see where the eyebrow pushes up, and I'm dropping down in my mind's eye. I'm looking at this. This is what I'm trying to do. See where the peak of this eyebrow lines up with the mouth, to ask myself, do I have this properly lined up? Now there's a whole orbital circle. I'm going to put a little indicator down here right now, just a little mark for the dark light, where he has kind of a circle, the bottom of the orbital circle. That'll help me, like a little construction line. That's going to help me see what's going on. But I'm only doing that now because I have all the larger structures. They're getting there. I was a little worried about it earlier on, but it's coming together a little bit better. So, okay, so we've got the whole orbital circle. I'm looking at this relationship of the eyes, the tilt of the eyes. Again, I'm thinking about structures, and then I'm also using plumb lines and horizontals to help me see what's going on in all the relationships. We managed to get plenty of toilet paper in my household, but not Viva paper towels, and that was a mistake. This feels a little wide, so I'm noticing where this connects down here. Every mark that you put in means something. So even if I'm thinking big abstract shape, at the same time, you know, I'm thinking about what is it that those big abstract shapes, or those simple shapes, what are they describing? You know, they have a function, they're there for a reason. So I find that to be helpful, to think that way. I'm getting a little bit of glare on here, but not too badly. Okay, so I'm stepping back. I'm just kind of assessing the whole thing. It feels a little wide to me, and I still haven't tried to get those dark lights in, although if there's a little residue, like right here, there's a little leftover residue on the painting. I'm not going to worry too much about that, and I hope the angle that the camera's at for you guys is working so you can see what's going on here. I am going to add just that little bit. If you find that your painting gets too wet and there's too much terp on it, which I'm finding a little bit is happening here. It may be because of the way I prepared this surface. I think I used some kind of ground on here. I'm not sure what I did to it as I repurposed this. I've been experimenting with different things. But if it feels a little wet, just work on another section for a little while, and the terp will dissipate and it will dry. So that's good news. The other thing is, if you're painting, if the paint isn't sticking, like just then it wasn't sticking quite that well, if you let it dry a little bit, you know, even in the course of, let's say you spend a couple, 2 or 3 hours doing this, it'll dry from when you start to, after like even 10 minutes, a section will be a little drier and it will accept more paint more easily. Okay, I'm gonna come in here and maybe make this just a little shorter. I want to push this part of the height of the light mask up, and what I'm doing is I'm going across like this. So I'm seeing how high his neck is exposed on this side, and I'm also looking, dropping it up and down so I can see where it relates to the outside of his mouth. So I'm checking here to here, and I'm also checking here to here to see how this is lining up. Because as I was pushing this up, I was trying to figure out how high this could come. So I wanted to be clear on this relationship. And so I'm also looking this way. So I'm noticing where the light that's representing, that's just above the collarbone, where is that lining up with the nose? And that'll help me place things. So I just automatically kind of do that. I make references. So I try to think about what structure it is. Like right here, I feel like this is the area above the collarbone, so I'm thinking about that. But then I do a double check, like right here. I'm thinking, wait a minute, this side on my left of his shirt should be, if I dropped a plumb line, a little bit outside of his cheekbone. So I've either got to straighten up his head or move this over a little bit to get that relationship right. And I'm not surprised. I could, again, when I started, and this is not uncommon for me, it's probably true for everybody. Sometimes I feel like I have to warm up. It's almost like being an athlete or a musician or a dancer. In the beginning, sometimes I'm just awkward and clumsy, and I feel like I can't see as well. And it used to really throw me when that would happen. But now I'm still not thrilled, but I get it, it's like warming up your muscles. As I work on things, my ability to see really improves. So be patient with yourself, and that's gonna happen. Okay, so moved this over. That alignment is a little bit better. Still gonna push this in a little bit. I love working alla prima, meaning I like doing things all in one time slot, because you can just really move the paint around. So now the paint is just setting up a little bit, and some of the paint that I had on there earlier, I can move it around now. So I'm going to go back and re-examine the relationship here between here and here, because his face just looks a little wide, and I want to try to fix that. And sometimes, I mean, I am trying to work all around and think all around, but at the same time, you know, I'll focus on one area, but I like to jump around a little bit too. So again, part of it's kind of working with your attention, your energy. You still have to solve the problems, and you still have to understand what it is you're trying to solve. So that's huge. So I feel like this is offering a procedure, but we're basing this on principles and, you know, suggested procedure, but also principles like separation of light and shadow, relating, expressing lines as straight lines which come together and create angles, and trying to see what those angles are and what the tilts of the line are, and understand the construction of the head based on your knowledge of anatomy. So it all comes in looking for big structures. I'm adding just a slight bit of tone here into which is part of the light mass. I'm aware that this is part of the light mass, but I feel like it's going to just help me understand the shape a little bit. So I'm okay with doing this now. I say that because I wanted to get the main information first, the large information first, always trying to work general to specific. That's surprisingly more difficult than you'd think. So you don't want to just be copying a series of details. You want to understand the bigger connection. So I feel like I've still got a little bit of extra width here. I'm just going to put in a little indicator here now, just so I can get a little better sense if I'm on the right track here with the nose. Looking at this eye, which is still, I don't have enough room for the lid, so I've got to figure out what's going on, and this is a little too wide here too. So I want to check his nose, go up the bridge, turn this way, that's the glabella, make sure that the glabella is this upside down truncated triangle, which is situated right there above the bridge of the nose. And I'm shifting to over here, so I can figure out how to get a little more room in for the lid. I'm noticing that the lid moves down here. It's a little downward. Checking these relationships. So it's a simple shape, but at the same time, there's got to be enough room for there to be an eyelid and the area above the eyebrow. So I'm looking here, going here. I see a little pathway from the outside of his eye down to his cheekbone here, and then down this way. I'm going to go back up here now and push this up. So I didn't have this shadow on the corner of his mouth high enough. So I'm going to start moving that around right now. I don't know, that was a little dangerous doing it with that much turp. I hope it's not going to drip. So however much turp you have deposited on, sometimes you can also move the turp, the wet areas around. So, you know, this is a wonderful exercise in just learning about paint manipulation. I know Robin showed you guys a lot of subtle stuff on her series of videos, very cool series of videos that she did. And that was wonderful. Pushing up here, looking at this, looking at the width. So, I'm gonna grab another brush. All right, so I'm gonna double check this shadow underneath the cheekbone. I'm bringing it in a little. I want to establish this shadow on this corner of the lip. It's higher than I had it, and probably that was something I should have seen from the get-go, but that's okay. So his mouth is laying over a cylindrical form. So I'm thinking about that. As I'm putting the corner of the mouth in, I'm checking visually to see where does this corner of his lower lip line up with his eye. So this is what I'm really looking at. So I'm in my mind dropping a plumb line down. So again, it's just a really easy way to just check things. Same thing here as I'm figuring out where to place this shadow. I'm dropping a line. I'm going like this, so I can see from the bottom, like of the bottom of his nose through the philtrum down to where this shadow is placed in the plane that's under his lip. So again, extending lines beyond where they end is a super helpful way to see how things should be placed. Okay, stepping back. Still have to work on that mouth. Again, I'm trying to separate light and shadow, but I wanted to put that little mark there that Sargent has, so it'll help me really see where the chin connects. But the main thing is to see this line that's across here and get that right. And you want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what's in light and what's in shadow. That's very preliminary, and you got to have that right. Because if you just respond to tone alone, meaning just values alone, and not be mindful of whether or not they're in light and shadow, things can get confused. Now I'm looking over here, there's some lights over here within this shadow. I believe they are reflected lights. I raised the mouth up, but now I'm pushing it back down a little. I think maybe I've got it up a little too high. And even though I added some little information to help me see where things are placed, you want to be careful, because if it's suddenly, the tones, the values can affect your read. So if I have enough small marks that it impacts on the bigger reading of the bigger shapes, that can get a little confusing. So watch out for that. I hope you guys understand what I mean by that. So if I have a little bit of indicators, I'm not trying to put in dark lights, but if I have a little bit of indicators just to help me with the drawing, and they have enough value on it that it makes shapes look differently, that can be confusing. Still checking for the simple shapes, correcting. It's fun to wonder who these people were, like who was this guy? Okay, going back, looking at my big relationships. Now, obviously the top of his mouth, it's in light, but I want to have it in here. I need to put an indicator in here. So, you know, just we're separating light and shadow, but do what you have to do. Put in the important stuff that's going to help you. Be mindful of the eyebrows if they're in light. I've noticed that sometimes people have a tendency to make eyebrows really dark. They just are responding to the graphic aspect of the eyebrow without realizing that, you know, it's in light. Still carving away at the head, getting that unusual shape. I wanted to see where this is lined up relative to his nostril. It's just about lined up with his nostril, but actually it's a little bit further over to my left relative to the nostril. So this is what I was doing. I'm dropping down, seeing where it was lined up. So it's amazing how many corrections I've had to make. But that's just the process too. It's like, it's this balance between, I want accuracy, but I also want freedom, and I want some freedom in moving into the form. So it's a balance. I also feel like one of the things, it's just like, again, when I was saying earlier, it's like being a musician or an athlete. You know, this is like practicing the violin, and you just get really good at whatever passage you're doing. Whatever, or if you're an athlete, just repeating the same thing. I find as I do this, it really enhances my skills. So while I know it's hard that we don't have models right now, there is a lot of skill building going on in this exercise. I feel like the whole time I've been sort of just carving him narrower and narrower. I am getting there, but it's been a process of just winnowing him. Is that a word? You know what I mean. So here's something I'm noticing now. Like, for example, I put a shadow in here, and there's a light mass here. In my painting, they're just about evenly shaped. I don't know if you guys can see that close. And I can't zoom, and I don't want to take the phone off. But as I'm looking, I can see that the shadow shape is bigger than the light shape below it. So it's like, aha, I couldn't see that before, or I didn't see it before. And I'm also seeing the way the shadow shape, if I drew a line through it, connects right through into the eye socket. And it's just a shadow shape from his hair, but I missed that too. I missed that bigger connection. So I want to sort of see how they flow together. So that's a good thing to see too. But the reason I'm pointing that out is I feel like as I'm working, you know, my vision starts to get more fine-tuned, and I start to see things that I couldn't quite see. And it's like my muscles, my painting muscles, my hand-eye coordination, everything starts to improve as I'm working. So that's good. So painting regularly is, I think, really key to maintaining your skill set. And if you recognize that, oh, okay, this is like being a musician. You know, if I was a violinist in the orchestra, I couldn't just play, you know, once a week and maintain that skill level. I wish I could say that it's just about once you get the theory, you'll have it. It just doesn't work that way. And I feel like as one piece gets adjusted and corrected, another piece comes to play. That's why I jump around, because I'm changing things as I'm noticing them. So this is kind of the refinement, you know, smaller shape stage. I'm getting to smaller and smaller shapes and relationships. Like right over here, I noticed that this light mass underneath the eyebrow has to move over, so it's lined up with the eyelid. And maybe the cheekbone now is a little bit too wide. That would really help some of the problems I've been having. I turn my brush at different angles just because of the glare that's coming in. And depending on which way your brush strokes go on, you may or may not get glare. Now, he's got a little bit of reflected light in here. I'm just gonna move across this shape, and then I'm pulling out a little bit of reflected light, and each time I work like this, I'm wiping the brush back off a little bit so that my brush ends up being like an eraser. So I'm looking at this as a shape and looking at the abstract essence of it. And then I'm also thinking about, all right, how does this work structurally? Is this going around the cheekbone? And what's going on down here? So I'm using more than one, you know, mental skill set. I'm thinking about it as a simple abstract shape. I'm thinking about it in the context of this bigger structure of the head too. So the more you know about anatomy, the more you're going to be able to apply that thinking here. Okay, so back to this again. I don't know, maybe some artists like to just focus on one little section at a time. I have talked to people who can work on one ear all day long. I just can't. And I accept that about myself, that I just like to move around a little bit on my painting. I stay more engaged that way, I guess, is maybe what it is. As I'm bringing this up, like just now I was checking it across to see, okay, where does the bottom of this part of the chin, if I move my eye across here, where is it going to intersect over here? And when I look at mine, it's not quite happening the way it's happening in Sargent's painting. So I'm kind of thinking about that, like, okay, what, and then I'm also looking at the size of this part right here of his chin, and I see that it's too big. So that's two puzzle pieces that are going to help me. So I need to push this up anyway, so it'll intersect correctly over here. And then and I also look at this beautiful angle at how wide open that angle is. So, and then this is going to get smaller in the process. I have to make sure this is right. So there's a bunch of different things that I'm checking, and one leads to the next. So it's really kind of fun. It's like a puzzle that all these pieces have to fit. The parts to the hole, keep going around, back over here again. General to specific, macro to micro. I'm pulling a little tiny bit of light out right there because I want to show him looking at me in a way that it's not happening quite. So that was just literally the white of the eye. Mouth feels a little big. Checking the eyes. It's amazing with eyes, just, you know, if you get it slightly off, the person can not look like they're looking at you. So going across here, just trying to see if there's something that I can do that'll give me what I want right here. I would like to make a few little dark accents. I stayed with the burnt umber pretty much the whole time, or the whole time. Don't forget to squint. Really squint. It's incredibly important to keep squinting. It's amazing what you can see squinting that you can't see not squinting. I mean, I know this is true, and yet I still marvel at the fact of how I can see things squinting that I just missed completely when not squinting. So that's why I also set this up so that I had my master copy, set back from where I'm working. I find if I have them side by side, and again, it's not a right or wrong, but I can't, it's harder for me to squint. Pushed this chin up just a little bit. Something still not quite what I want. Getting there though, it's really getting better. Almost there. Something going on here. I'm very wary about how much turf is on the brush when I wipe out like this, because I know what can happen. When I first learned this technique of wiping out with the brush, I was very excited about it, and I was working on a figure, and I thought it was really beautiful, and we had our break. After 20 minutes, the timer rang, it was the break. I went and got coffee or did something, I don't know what. Came back, my whole painting had ripped down the canvas. Oh, I was so frustrated. So watch out. if you're doing that. I'm just giving you a heads up. Okay, so I think that's a little bit better on the mouth. But I can see that this shadow I have here, the shape of it's too big. This is the slow part, guys. I would turn the camera off, but I confess I don't know how to edit it yet. So my apologies if this is the longest, slowest demo ever. It's sort of starting to feel like that. I don't mind, but I'm just a little worried about you guys. All right, I'm going to try to pick out just a few little light points. So, do you have to spend this much time on a grisaille, on an open grisaille? No, absolutely not. I'm pushing it now. So, it's sort of like a charcoal drawing. And you can see that I'm essentially keeping the lights wiped out, right? It's just that the residue of the paint is leaving a little bit of marks, which I'm exploiting on purpose. And I did put in just a little bit of dark lights, not to suggest turning form, but to help me with the drawing. To help me with the placement of the shapes, that aspect of the drawing. I'm going to try taking out a few little spots. Maybe a completely dry brush. Let's see how this works. I haven't used this brush at all yet. This is a number 2 filbert. Just going to pull out some of these highlights. Suggesting the light on the hair. What you can also do is if you have lines that got a little sharp or edges that got a little too hard, particularly from if you were wiping out with a brush, it leaves a hard edge. You can go in now with a completely dry brush and modify these edges just a little bit. I'm just going over them to just make them not quite so crisp. So it doesn't feel quite so cut out. So anywhere that you feel like the edge, you want to modify it just a little bit. You don't have to make every edge not sharp. And how this works is also going to depend on how wet or dry your paint is, the nature of the canvas surface. Is it an absorbent canvas? Is it a panel? So all these things come into play, the nature of your surface and how it works. So these are all things that you have to figure out. Oh, I just found something that I hadn't noticed before. This little kind of dark light that I let be in there, if I look at the way I saw it, look, I have it going like this, and it really should be that way. And I didn't see that. So I'm going to push this way to correct that. Now I'm going to also try a little bit of wiping out with paper towel. If it didn't wipe out enough with the brush. So I have an idea for a time travel romance movie. Not with this guy. But what about if the artist is painting somebody from the past, maybe a master copy, and the person in the master copy is able to come alive and they're able to communicate? That's cool. I just want to get a little suggestion of this because I realize that none of these highlights are really going to be as light as this when we paint it on. I do see some reflected light in there, but I don't really want to mess around with that. Okay, I'm almost done, I just want to make this lip a little smaller. I know there's a little tone on it, but don't really want to get caught up in that. Sorry you can't ask questions, guys. Yep. Just gotta be a captive audience here. Just checking things. I know the mouth still isn't quite right. But I just sort of kind of don't want to deal with it, and I'm going to lighten this up a little bit. There's a little chunk of paint on here, so I don't want that. I just took this brush and I rubbed it across a paper towel so it would take almost all of the paint off of it, but just left tiny little residue. Enough so that I could figure out how to do this mouth. You know you're ready for a break when it's not getting better, then you're tweaking a little part and it's getting worse. So, I don't know if this is going to work. When we first started doing Open Grisaille at Studio Caminati, we tried all these little methods of how to wipe out the paint, including Q-tips, little pieces of paper towel like this. I'm improvising because the tools that I normally have are not available. But this is a good thing. I think this is how innovation happens and growth. By having to try different things in different ways. Oh, you know what I haven't tried that I really should? I'm going to try the mirror. So, It's really helpful to look in a mirror in reverse to see what you're doing, especially if you can actually get the mirror open. There we go. So I'm going to look at my painting in reverse and try to look at both the painting and the master copy. Okay, that gave me some information. As I thought, the thing that's the biggest problem is the mouth. So just gonna go back over here. I think I have this too far over. And I think this is a little too long. So I'm thinking to myself, jaw, chin, okay, just about done. Now, last thing I'm going to do, which you can do if you want, I'm giving myself a little more paint, is, you know, maybe hit your darks a little darker. So for the most part, one value in the lights, two values in the darks, which includes the shadows, but it includes more than the shadow in the darks. So I'm going to work a little bit, adding a little bit more darks, and then I'll come back for part 2 of this, which will be adding the light mass in.